For nearly 50 years, the world lived under a pressure that shaped every continent, every government, and every major decision in global politics. It was not a traditional war. There were no direct battles between the United States and the Soviet Union, no official declaration, no final peace treaty, and yet, the entire world was pulled into a constant state of tension. This was the Cold War, a global confrontation fought through intelligence, economics, propaganda, military buildup, and political influence. And most importantly, through the constant fear that everything could end in minutes. To understand how this began, we need to go back to 1945. World War II had just ended. Europe was devastated. Entire cities were destroyed. Millions were dead. Economies collapsed. But from the ruins, two superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. During the war, they were allies, but it was never a relationship built on trust. It was built on necessity, a shared enemy. Once Nazi Germany fell, that shared enemy disappeared, and what remained was something far more dangerous: suspicion and ideology. The United States believed in democracy, capitalism, and individual freedom. The Soviet Union believed in communism, centralized control, and political uniformity. Both believed their system was superior, and both believed compromise was impossible. The world was about to split in two. By 1946, the tension was already visible. Winston Churchill described a new reality in Europe. He called it the Iron Curtain, a symbolic division separating East and West. On one side stood Western Europe, supported economically and politically by the United States. On the other side stood Eastern Europe, increasingly controlled by the Soviet Union. This was not just a border. It was a transformation of entire societies. In Eastern Europe, Soviet influence expanded rapidly after World War II. Countries such as Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Romania, and Czechoslovakia were brought under communist control. In many cases, elections were manipulated or eliminated entirely. Opposition was silenced. Media became state-controlled, and political dissent became dangerous. Meanwhile, the United States chose a different strategy. Instead of direct control, it used economic influence. In 1948, the Marshall Plan was introduced. Billions of dollars were provided to rebuild Western Europe. Officially, it was about recovery. Strategically, it was about stability and influence. A stronger Western Europe meant fewer opportunities for Soviet expansion. Europe was no longer just recovering from war. It was becoming the first major arena of the Cold War, not with armies, but with systems, economies, and alliances. In 1949, the Cold War entered a more dangerous phase. The Soviet Union successfully tested its first nuclear weapon. The United States lost its monopoly on atomic power. This changed global politics forever, because nuclear weapons were not ordinary weapons. They were existential weapons. Soon after, both sides developed even more powerful systems. The hydrogen bomb, thousands of times more powerful than the weapons used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Entire cities could be destroyed in seconds. This created a new global reality: mutually assured destruction, a doctrine based on one simple idea. If one side launched a nuclear attack, the other side would respond, and both would be destroyed completely. There would be no winner, only total destruction. This created a paradox. Direct war became less likely because it meant global suicide. But at the same time, fear became constant. Governments built underground bunkers. Military forces remained on constant alert. Radar systems monitored the skies 24/7, and civilians lived with the awareness that civilization itself was fragile. One mistake, one misunderstanding, could end everything. While nuclear weapons defined the surface of the Cold War, much of the real conflict happened in secrecy. Intelligence agencies became powerful tools of influence. The CIA in the United States, the KGB in the Soviet Union, both operated globally. Their mission was not only to collect information, but also to shape events. They recruited spies, intercepted communications, conducted covert operations, and spread disinformation. In this environment, trust became extremely rare. Even allies suspected infiltration. Even governments feared internal betrayal. At the same time, the Cold War spread through indirect conflicts. These were known as proxy wars. Instead of fighting each other directly, the superpowers supported opposing sides in regional conflicts. In Korea, ideological division led to a brutal war that permanently split the peninsula. In Vietnam, a long and devastating conflict drew in global powers for decades. In Afghanistan, foreign intervention turned a local conflict into a global struggle. These wars were officially regional, but in reality, they were shaped by global rivalry. And for the people living through them, the Cold War was not cold at all. Beyond conflict and espionage, the Cold War also became a competition for technological dominance. This competition extended beyond Earth itself. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. A small object, but a massive signal. It marked the beginning of the space age, and it proved that the Soviet Union had advanced rocket technology. In 1961, the USSR achieved another milestone. Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. Once again, the Soviet Union led the race. The United States responded with a more ambitious goal, landing a human on the moon. This became one of the most complex technological projects in history. In 1969, Apollo 11 succeeded. Neil Armstrong became the first human to step onto the lunar surface. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. These achievements were not only scientific breakthroughs, they were political messages, proof of technological superiority, and symbolic victories in a global competition. As the decades passed, the Cold War became a permanent structure of global politics. Military alliances formed to maintain balance. NATO was created in 1949. In response, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The world became divided into two major blocs. Each side built massive military arsenals. Conventional forces grew, nuclear stockpiles expanded, and military planning became focused on deterrence rather than victory. Because victory in nuclear war was impossible, only survival mattered. At the same time, propaganda became a powerful tool. Both sides tried to influence global perception. Films, radio broadcasts, and news media were used to promote ideology. Even culture became part of the competition. Music, technology, and sports were all indirectly influenced by the rivalry. The Cold War was not just political, it was psychological. A global competition for influence over how people thought. By the 1980s, cracks began to appear in the Soviet system. Economic stagnation slowed development. Technological competition became harder to sustain, and internal reforms created instability instead of strength. Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies known as glasnost and perestroika. They aimed to increase transparency and reform the economy. But instead of stabilizing the system, they accelerated change. Across Eastern Europe, political movements grew stronger, protests spread, governments weakened, and one by one, communist regimes collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, a symbolic moment that marked the beginning of the end. The division that had defined Europe for decades was disappearing. The Cold War was reaching its final phase. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. The Cold War ended without a final battle. No surrender ceremony, no peace treaty ending a single war, just the gradual collapse of one system and the global dominance of another. But its influence did not disappear. It shaped modern intelligence agencies, military alliances like NATO, global economic systems, and technological competition that continues today. The Cold War was not a traditional war. It was a global struggle that defined an entire era. A conflict fought in shadows, politics, space, and ideology. And even today the world still feels its consequences.